Hello, Daphne here again with another video, this time about how I came to be born in Shanghai, China. And the slide presentation which you're about to see was made for my daughter because she wanted to take her two daughters to see where her mother was born and to walk in the footsteps of her grandparents. Shanghai, China in the 30s was a very glamorous place. It was sometimes referred to as the Paris of the East. Daddy started a medical practice there. Eventually, after merging with a few British doctors, his became the largest practice in all of Shanghai. He treated the likes of Chiang Kai-shek and other Chinese dignitaries. His office was located on the Bund in a bank building which was flanked by two enormous lions. My parents enjoyed all the social pleasures. They were one of Shanghai's most glamorous couples. It was a splendid life filled with an abundance of gaiety and joy for them both. Anyway, watching the destruction of Shanghai by the Japanese was one of the most horrifying events my parents endured during their lifetime. Before those horrible events occurred, my twin sister and I were born, and here's a picture of us in our christening gowns, about to be baptized in Holy Trinity Church, which is the oldest remaining Western-style buildings left in Shanghai. Right here is my godmother, Isabel. I loved Aunt Isabel. She was a treasure in every sense of the word, an Annie Mame type who made everything fun. Don't you love people like that just know how to make life fun, no matter what? Anyway, I miss my Aunt Isabel something terrible these days. Okay, here are pictures of my parents and their life in Shanghai, my glamorous mother and very hard-working doctor father. My parents, as I mentioned before, loved Shanghai, and they lived such a happy and charmed life there. A city that was truly magical to them. They belonged to the country club, the Columbia Country Club, where many social activities took place. Another favorite party place for them was the Cathay Pacific Hotel on the Bund, now the Fairmont. When Daddy and Mom lived in Shanghai, it was considered one of the most glamorous places in all the world. And as I mentioned, they did live a charmed life. On the bottom left are my mom and dad in the pool at the Columbia Country Club. Of course, my mother had to dress herself and her two twins in matching outfits. Thank goodness she spared my father that. But anyway, I guess it was important enough that it made mention in the North China Daily News. Our swimsuits. Anyway, I got a kick out of the fact that anything like that could make a news article of any kind. Here are a few pictures of the glamorous couple, my mom and dad. My mother in the bottom left there with all her friends, all decked out to the nines at the racetrack. They loved going to the races together. And they sat in Victor's box, a prominent businessman in Shanghai at the time. As you can see, they loved partying. They had dress-up parties. My mother was a glamour girl in every sense of the word. And this picture's interesting here. It was taken at the Cathay Pacific Hotel, and even though you can hardly see it, this is a Lalique chandelier behind my mother. When my daughter was taken around the now Fairmont Hotel, she was shown this exact Lalique chandelier, believe it or not. It's still there. That was a really special treat. I just couldn't believe it, but it was a good thing that she was able to see something or stand in front again, and something that my parents had stood in front of so many years ago. Well, my twin sister and I were spoiled rotten. As you can see, here we are being chauffeured around by one of our servants. Gosh, we had a good time. Anyway, there's a picture of our family car and the chauffeur that took my father to work every day. The bottom right is our beautiful, magnificent home at 231 Amherst Avenue in the international settlement part of Shanghai. It was a gorgeous house. My mother absolutely loved interior decorating, and she did a magnificent job creating a very beautiful home for all of us. Well, the charm life came to an abrupt end when, in 1942, my father was thrown into concentration camp by the Japanese. He was hauled off to Haiphong Road. It was a shock and a terrible time for my mother. She was left with all the responsibilities of her twin daughters, her mother, a house full of servants, and an uncertain future. She was stalwart, though, and kept her chin up high and kept going. My father's experience at Haiphong Road was torture in the first degree. Not only physical torture, but because he was a medical doctor, he so wanted to treat the sick and dying that were fellow prisoners there. He pleaded with the Japanese, pleaded and pleaded with them to supply him with the necessary medicines to help these people that were in such dire need. The Japanese cold-heartedly refused. I believe this was more torture than being in a concentration camp for my father. After all, he was a doctor put on this earth to help other people, and he was refused that simple request, which devastated him. My mother and my twin sister and me and my grandmother, we were put into concentration camp on Haiphong Road. At a place called Chapai Concentration Camp, now Shanghai Normal University. But in spite of all the suffering that my parents did being separated for that torturous year, we were fortunate because in the summer of 1943, we were chosen to be an exchange of prisoners between America and Japan. So we were able to leave Shanghai before the war, unlike a lot of other people. And we then were taken with all our possessions and everything left behind, and we had to say goodbye to the most wonderful life anybody could ever have in Shanghai. And we boarded the good ship Gripsholm. It was a Swedish mail ship hired by the U.S. government to bring us back to America. As you can see, my father here, 6'2", 190 pounds upon entering camp, is a meager 145 pounds here. It just makes me sick to look at this picture and know what he went through. He was such a wonderful man. But my mother, the ever keep your chin up parent, had us looking like we had just gone to a garden party on the Gripsholm. There again, with us all in matching frocks. I could not believe it when I looked at this picture taken by a Life magazine photographer way back when. When my mother and father arrived after the long journey back, we crossed the equator 4 times. When she stepped foot on American soil in New York City, she said it was one of the most happy moments in her life to be home and in freedom again. She said people don't recognize how important freedom is until it's taken away. I believe truer words were never spoken. So in 2010, I had a chance to return to Shanghai, and I enjoyed every minute there. Here I am with friends at the Great Wall of China. Here I am under the plaque, next to the plaque, talking about the international settlement. Here is the house that stands where my parents' house used to stand. It must have been demolished. It's no longer there. And here my guide is talking to this teacher about this room, 216, being the room in which I was interned as a baby in Shanghai in 1943. She was horrified. But as you can see, she was about teaching the class, so she had a really interesting history lesson to give them right at that moment. And here I am in front of that bronze statue on the Bund, in front of my parents. In front of my father's medical office. So that is the story of my life. And I am very happy to say that I treasure the life that my parents lived. I treasure the fact that they lived through historic times. I'm grateful for all the history of our family, good, bad, and indifferent. And I'm so happy to be living in America and have the chance to go back and experience my roots, which were amazing, absolutely amazing. So God bless my parents. I hope they're happy together up there in heaven.